Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Future of art. Daniel Birnbaum, one of the sharpest of our present generation of art writers, had this to say of the future. If the future existed in a concrete sense that could be discerned by a better brain, we wouldn't be so seduced by the past. But the future, he observes via Nabokov, has no such reality. It's but a spectre of thought. I would therefore like to propose that any attempt to forecast the future in art is both a provocation to rethink the past and an opportunity to better come to terms with the present. Working through past gestures, of course, is hardly novel. In the 1960s, one observes pop artists painting their way through abstract expressionism before that, cubists confronting primitivism early in the 20th century, and so on and so on. For brevity's sake, perhaps it's best we simply concur with Marcel Duchamp that art is ultimately a game, a continually articulated struggle between the present, the past, and the future. In this model, the only constant is change. Change itself, this is a vision of history under perennial negotiation, historical truth as forever in situ. What then of the future? To begin, we should emphasize that visions of the future across almost all phenomena, A, evolve over time, and B, are many. The future, in other words, is both variant and plural. Or to say it with Cory Doctorow, the future will be widely reproduced and distributed. Ever since the 1990s, the art world has experienced an unprecedented internationalism. 90s have been regarded as a biennial decade, a qualifier which refers to the unseating of the hierarchically dominant institutional roles of museums and galleries by the global biennial or biennale. This exhibition model has been in place since the 19th century, but it has grown rapidly and very strongly over the past 15 years across the globe, from Korea to Senegal to Brazil to the United Arab Emirates and beyond. So we can observe through this biennale phenomenon a kind of a multiplication of centers maybe, or a polyphony of centers. The idea of the quest of one art center has sort of widened into a polyphony of centers. One aspect of art's future is premised, like many elements of our economy, on strategic transport partnership and expansions. Its market-driven inflections have other embodiments as well. One is the contemporary art fair, and the second is the upsurge in the private museums and private foundations. Neither of these attributes are new. Art fairs have been in vogue since the grand salons of the mid-19th century, and almost all of today's great civic art collections derived from private interests. Even so, the post-2000 contemporary art calendar has become awash in art fairs, and such fairs have eclipsed the biennial as salient presentation mechanisms of the moment. Now, what is interesting is that at that very moment, when we have more art fairs, more biennales, more museums than ever, in conversations with artists, there seems to be a desire for also other forms of exhibition. And that's the first project I would like to talk to you today. A project in the near future, in July this year, which Philippe Barreno, the artist, and I are co-curating, where we're wondering what if having an exhibition is actually not a way to occupy space, but a way to occupy time. It's a group show with leading contemporary artists happening in Manchester this summer in the form of an opera. The opera will be staged over the course of a few days and represents a new experiment in time coding and a return to the real space of engagement with audiences. As Matthew Barney told me when we were working and preparing this project, he feels that after this very strong presence of video in the 90s, at the very moment in time, a sort of a strong necessity or urge for non-mediated experiences, and that's why this idea of inviting all these artists to do time-based work in Manchester. Doris Lessing, with whom I spoke a couple of weeks ago, has spoken of a future beyond museums, ways. She talked about ways beyond museum. It's actually not that she's fundamentally opposed to this institution, but she's worried that their prioritization of material objects from the past may not be enough to convey functional meaning to tomorrow's generations. So this idea, what could be museums beyond objects, is something we find interesting, and that leads us to the next project. Having moved to London last year and starting to actually co-direct the Serpentine Gallery with Julia Peyton-Johns, we continued the Pavilion program, which had started in 2000. Was started by Julia Peyton-Johns with Zaha Hadid, an extraordinary pavilion of Zaha Hadid, and had then developed through annual architecture projects. So this idea of producing reality, each year a new temporary architecture is built next to the Serpentine Gallery. So the idea is that on the one hand, you have the permanent art institution, the Serpentine Gallery, but on the other hand, a laboratory, a temporary laboratory, where for summertime, new experiments are possible. As context is everything, I was thinking that in the context of this conference on the future, on the near future, it could be interesting to also reflect upon the near future of the conference, or of the symposium. I'm very interested in how conferences, symposium, knowledge production can become catalysts. And this was something Stanislav Lem, whom I met several times in the 90s, was very interested in. And I'd like to remember here his extraordinary book, The Futurological Congress. I think it's interesting in the context of this conference that we remember Stanislav Lem's 71 book, The Futurological Congress, where Lem writes about future conventions, like our own, in which papers are presented, but read only in the most succinct manner as a numeric stream, rather than a spoken language. 13, 22, 831 thus become expedient stand-ins for real words or phrases. Lem's is a peripatetic vision of knowledge formation in which global constituencies converge and disperse at once, sharing information and developing new models of communication. Now, what is interesting is that throughout the 20th century, we have a very strong experimental history of exhibitions. New display features have been invented, new models of exhibition, whilst the symposium and the conference has not changed so much. We still have keynote speeches, we have roundtables, we have panels, we have Q&As. So we see a great potential in this idea of inventing, in the near future, new forms of conferences which develop, similar to exhibition history in the 20th century, new formats of knowledge production for the 21st century. And that was one of the things we tested last summer with Rem Koolhaas. Rem Koolhaas and Cecil Balmond had been invited to develop the pavilion for the Serpentine Gallery, which you see here. And the idea was actually, as Rem Koolhaas said, an architecture without content is meaningless shape. So the idea was somehow to develop content throughout the summer. We developed 24-hour marathons, a London marathon, where Rem and I did interviews for 24 hours non-stop, making a kind of a discursive portrait of present-day London, obviously a fragmentary portrait of present-day London. And after that, a second marathon, where we somehow tried for 12 hours to make interviews around the topic of art, power, and money. What also played a big role somehow in these conferences was the idea of memory. Eric Hobsbawm, with whom we spoke a lot, preparing the marathon. Here you see Gilbert and George. Eric Hobsbawm said that it would be very important to have a protest against forgetting. So it was not only interviews about the current moment, but also many pioneers of layers of London, of the 50s, of the 60s, of the 70s, of many, many disciplines. So this idea also of going beyond the fear of pooling knowledge, we were thinking that the only thing we have to fear is the fear itself of pooling knowledge. So that was somehow the marathon. Here you see Doris Lessing. It culminated in an interview with Doris Lessing. And that will continue next summer with a completely different type of program, because we have invited, Julia Peyton-Johns and I have invited Olafur Eliasson and Kjetil Thorsen to co-design the pavilion. And together with Olafur Eliasson, we will actually develop this year not talks, because we felt we have talked enough last summer in these really long marathons, but we are going to develop experiments. We will invite practitioners from all disciplines to do experiments, handheld experiments in the pavilion. So it will be a summer of experiment in London. Another aspect which starting in London last year we felt was important is this idea of taking into account the extraordinary transfer of the center of gravity which is happening in the art world right now. The emergence of incredible artists in China, in India, in the Middle East. It's something which reminds me almost of Fernand Braudel, when Fernand Braudel describes these extraordinary seismic shifts from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic and Pacific, which he observed in the 16th century. And the current emergence of these new art scenes, totally dynamic art scenes in China, India, and the Middle East, seem the thing which as an art institution we feel very, very important to map. So one project last year was China Power Station, which we actually sited in the historic Battersea Power Station. And the show brought together nearly 24 of the most innovative young video and filmmakers now working in China. There's a couple of images here, the landmark building. Ma Xingyun developed a new master plan, architect from Shanghai, for the site. Gu Daxin, more than 100,000 Apple, building a sculpture. Completely reactivating this building. A former Serpentine Pavilion by Toyo Ito, relocated on the site, provided a shop, provided also a restaurant. So the idea really to map this whole new energy of a completely new generation of artists and filmmakers, Ya Jiankei, the filmmaker here, or Yang Fudong, extraordinary video artists, and introduce these artists to London. Ai Weiwei develops an incredible blog and website in China, which has become far beyond the art world, a forum and a platform for exchange and dialogue. So the idea of Ai Weiwei being a kind of a great social sculptor of the 20th century made it very important to put him in the center of this show. An exhibition always hides many other exhibitions, particularly if it deals with such a complex issue of mapping a new art scene as the Chinese art scene. So we had shows within the show. Here you have a sonic archive, new sound artists projected into the Battersea main space. Another aspect are actually archives about the future. I've become increasingly actually taken with visions for the future in our own work in terms of curating. Over the past year, I've surveyed artists, architects, designers, historians, philosophers about their own opinions of tomorrow. In preparation for this talk, I contacted Liam Gillick, an English artist who now resides here in Manhattan, for a more elaborate scenario of the future. Scenario planning and the conflation of art making, writing and curating have long been elemental to Gillick's practice. Asked about this issue, he replied with one of his what-if scenario and actually encouraged us all here today to think about new parallel histories. So quite similar to what someone like David Deutsch would discover in quantum physics, Gillick would think that the future is parallel realities. Another aspect of Gillick's involvement is AUP, is the Agency of Unrealized Projects, which is a project we do at the Serpentine to actually map unrealized artist projects which have been too big to be realized, too small to be realized, maybe forgotten projects, self-censor projects, censor projects, all kinds of unrealized projects which partially, hopefully, might be realized. So that's AUP, our new institution within the institution, the Agency of Unrealized Projects. Then there is the two final projects I would like to highlight and show you here. It's the formula and equation list, which I'm working on right now, which is a kind of an undertaking which has the working title Out of the Equation, Roads to Reality, and is inspired by Roger Penrose's groundbreaking publication, Roads to Reality, a complete guide to the laws of the universe, which he published in 2004. It's both actually this project a calculated and also a chaotic look inside the minds of some of our great contemporary thinkers. Artists, scientists, architects are invited to actually contribute a formula or an equation for the 21st century. And the idea came when I interviewed Benoit Mandelbrot last year, 2 years ago. He all of a sudden drew this fractal formula on a piece of paper. I think it could be somehow nice to ask artists, scientists, architects what could be a formula for the 21st century, and the book will be a sort of a sketchbook. So here you see John Baldessari, great American artist, his formula for art. J.G. Ballard. Olafur Eliasson, whom we mentioned before. Pierre Week. And last but not least, Rem Koolhaas, a formula for happiness. And there's another one, Peter Saville, good, fast and cheap. It can always be 2 but not 3. If it's fast and good, it cannot be cheap. If it's cheap and fast, it cannot be good. That's Peter Saville, who also, by the way, developed the logo you saw at the very beginning for the opera in Manchester. To end, I would like to present the Future project, The Future Will Be. It's a list I have compiled of definitions of the future by many artists, architects and scientists from all over the world. And you find them here. The future will be chrome. The future will be curved. The future will be in the name of the future. The future will be so subjective. The future will be booklet. The future will be curious. The future will be obsolete. The future will be asymmetric. The future will be a slap in the face. The future will be delayed. The future does not exist, but in snapshots. The future will be tropical. Future, you must be mistaken. The future will be overgrown and decayed. The future will be tense. A future full by human waste. The future is going nowhere without us. The future is now, the future is it. The future is one night, just look up. The future will be a remake. The future is what we construct from what we remember of the past. The present is the time of instantaneous revelation. The future is this place at a different time. The future will be widely reproduced and distributed. The future will be whatever we make it. The future will involve splendor and poverty. The future is uncertain because it will be what we make it. The future is waiting. The future will be self-organized. Dum spero, while I breathe, I hope. This is not the future. The future is a dog. L'avenir c'est la femme. The future will be an armchair strategist. The future will be like no snow on the broken bridge. The future always flies in under the radar. Future, that future. Tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. The future is overrated. The future is a large pharmacy with a memory deficit. The future will be bamboo. The future will be us. The future will be grains, particles and bits. The future will be ripples, waves and flow. The future will be mixed, swarms, multitudes. The future will be the future we deserve, but with some surprises if only some of us take notice. In the future, the earth as a weapon. The future is our excuse. The future will be repeated. Okay, I'll tell you about the future, but I'm very busy right now. Give me a couple of days more to finish some things and I'll get back to you. Future is instant. The future is not. The future is private. The future will be layered and inconsistent. The future is a piano wire in a pussy powering something important. In the future, perhaps there will be no past. The future was. The future is menace. The future is a forget-me-not. The future is a knowing exchange of glances. The future scratching on things I could disavow. The future is our own wishful thinking. Le futur est un étoilement. The future is now. The future has a silver lining. The future is now and here. The future is without you. The future is a season. The future is a poster. We have repeated the future out of existence. The future has 2 large, beautiful eyes. Less, few tours in my future. Future is what it is. The future is the very few years we have remaining before all time becomes one time. Future must be here today. Future is more freedom. My art is very free. I don't know what to do in the future, but I'm positive. The future is inside. No future. Punk is not death. The future will be grim if we don't do something about it. Thank you very much.